Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name is Tina Ngo Bartel, and I'm the Executive Director of the San Diego and Imperial Center of Excellence. And today we're going to share our responses or findings for our most recent report, the Student Support Services Study. Before we release the full report, we like to host town halls or events such as these to get comments on the findings before we finalize them. So with that, let me start with who we are. It seems like most of you know who we are, but if you do not, the San Diego and Imperial Center of Excellence serves the 10 community colleges across San Diego and Imperial counties. There are 9 community colleges in San Diego County and 1 in Imperial, and we serve them with research and training. So you might have heard of the Centers of Excellence in general. There are about 10 of us, 1 at the state level, 9 across 9 regions. And again, we serve specifically San Diego and Imperial County. So that's a little bit about the Centers of Excellence. Now we'll get into the research itself, some findings and some recommendations that we might have for the final report. So before we talk about student support services, let's get all on the same page. So what are they? Well, when you look at all the different colleges across the region and across the state, there are many types of student support services, but we grouped the most commonly used ones into the following categories after we conducted a literature review. And the most commonly used ones can be grouped into these 5 categories. We actually worked with Dr. Franklin Garrett over at San Diego Continuing Ed to help us figure out how to best group them, especially since there's such a variety of across all the different colleges. So the 5 categories are generally academic, career, financial, health, and student life. These are the types of services under student support services as defined by this particular report. We did something similar in terms of defining it in a previous study, and we'll put this in the chat, but if you haven't had a chance to review it, we had a study on our students, the public's experience with our student support services website. Here's the QR code, but for those of you who don't have phones available, this is the link in the chat. Here we go. And similarly, in this report, we found that those were the main groupings of student support services. All right, so we talked about what they are and why is this important for us? Well, when we looked at prior research, we found that student support services in general really help with student retention and engagement. Not only that, but overall, they help students navigate our system, any educational system, to achieve their personal educational and career goals. So these are some national studies that we saw that had similar findings. So our team wanted to figure out, all right, for our region, what are the most used student support services? And throughout the presentation, I'll use triple S or SSS, so you know that I'm referring to student support services as a whole. We also wanted to know what was their experience, how would they rate their experiences with the colleges and with student support services, and are there any employment outcomes associated with the student support services use and experience? There's a lot of data. I'm going to try to go through them relatively as a high overview, and then at the end, we can have an open discussion. My teammate, John Edwards, is on the line, so he is going to be checking to see if there are questions in the chat they can answer or share with me at the end. So I ask that if you have any questions, feel free to hold them to the end of the presentation. All right, so what did we do? Who did we survey? Well, it's really hard to figure out who used student support services, who didn't, without actually conducting a survey. So we tried to do a blanketed approach where we surveyed the general population. What we did was we procured contact lists of residents in San Diego and Imperial counties, and we called and surveyed as many people we can find on those lists last year. We were able to get 292 people who said that they reported taking at least one course at one of our 10 regional community colleges. I really debated showing the slide because the colleges always ask me, can I get data for my particular college about the report you did? We'll talk about that later, but for now, you could see the distribution as to who said that they took at least one course at one of our 10 colleges. So we were able to examine the data of all the people who at least took one class or last enrolled at our college. Of those 292 valid responses, most of them said they took a course in 2018 or earlier. So you can see here the distribution of the 292 people who responded to the survey who said they last enrolled at the community college. 2019 and above, or 2019 and later, there was small percentages. So throughout the report, as much as possible, we try to compare, all right, was there any difference between people who said they last took a course in 2018 and earlier versus those at 2019 and earlier? So you'll see the distribution here. It's quite a few people who said they took a course in 2018 or earlier. If I could redo this, if we can get more people after the 2018 date, that would have been great, but that was the sample that we had to work with. So keep that in mind, who's responding to this particular survey. Not surprisingly, when we asked them if they took an in-person, online, or a hybrid course, those that enrolled or last took a class at our colleges in 2018 and earlier said that they took in-person only. So 89% of those that took at least one course from our colleges during this time period were only in person. And you'll see here that for those that enrolled in our colleges in 2019 and later, had it pretty much across the board. Some took in-person only, some took online only, and some took a hybrid. And you'll see here that those that enrolled in 2019 and later, they were more significantly likely to take a hybrid course than those that took one in 2018 and earlier. I'm sure it has to do with a lot that we weren't teaching online courses as much maybe back in 2018 than we did during the pandemic and after. I'll let you decide for yourself why you think there were more people who had hybrid courses. So of the people who last enrolled in the community college system, we asked them, why are you no longer enrolled in any of our courses? And this was a question that we borrowed from the Career Technical Education Outcome Survey from the Chancellor's Office. These are some of the responses that people are able to choose from. And mostly, almost half of the folks said that they were no longer enrolled in any of our community colleges because their educational goals were met. The second highest response following that was they got a job or changed job. But essentially, it seems like a lot of folks got their educational goals. All right, so that was a general overview of who responded to the survey. So let's go back to our research questions. What are the most used student support services? Of the 292 people who responded to our survey, 61% of them said they at least used one student support service. And when we asked them which of the student support services do they use, you'll see that 47% of the people who responded to the survey said they used the academic services, followed by 38% for career services, 35% for financial services, 21% for student life, and 19% for health. So nearly half of our students, or half of the people who said they enrolled at a community college, used the academic services, followed by career services. And then here are the top 3 student support services used by type. So for academic services, the top 3 were library, tutoring center, and transfer center. For career services, they talked about career counseling, work experience, and student employment work study paid internships. Financial aid, scholarships, basic needs were under the financial category. For student life, most used services were student clubs, athletics, associated student government. And then finally, for health, personal behavioral or mental health counseling was the top used service, followed by student health clinic or telehealth support services. So that answers our questions of what are the most used student support services type. So our researcher, Mod Research Consulting Priscilla Fernandez, dug into statistical differences to see if there were different uses by type, and also whether or not certain people were aware of a type of service than others. So in the data, she found that most students were aware of these student services offerings. About 88% said they knew about our student support services at the colleges. But despite the fact that they knew about them, less than half of our students used each of the student support services when we separated by type. So as I mentioned earlier, less than half used academic services. So 88% knew, less than half actually used them. So when Priscilla took a look at the statistical differences, we looked at all the different demographic profiles that we can find in the that we asked for in the survey to see if different groups had different responses than others. So for example, in the survey, we had about half of the people identify as female, 35% as male, 3% non-binary, transgender, or self-described, and 10% said they preferred not to answer. So we looked at this group and we tried to look, is there a statistically significant difference in their responses by gender? And we found that females were more likely to use academic services than any other counterpart in this gender category. None of the other student support services had any statistical difference. And then we looked at whether or not they were a person of color, a Black, Indigenous people of color, or a person from the white racial ethnic category, like right here. We had 37% of respondents that identified as white versus 63% who identified as BIPOC, or Black, Indigenous people of color. And we wanted to see if there were any significant differences for that grouping. And we found that across the board, BIPOC individuals more than white used academic, career, financial, and student life and health services. Then we compared the last enrollment year. So folks that last enrolled in 2019 and after, they were more likely to use every single one of these services than those that were enrolled in 2018 or earlier. And then we also asked if they had a special population status. So if they were identified as special population, so for example, somebody with a disability, somebody who is from foster youth, military affiliated, did they use any of these student services? And yes, more people who identified as one of the special populations were more likely to use our student support services than those that did not identify with this particular status. So those are some of the major findings in terms of differences, which we thought was very important for the colleges to know. So this shows at a snapshot view how important these services are to different groups, especially those that are more recently enrolled in our colleges, those who are from the BIPOC population, and those with student special population status. All right, so that was use. So we asked them, as I mentioned, how many people, how did they learn about student support services? So this was to help you with your, excuse me, I'm hopping around, to help you with your outreach and marketing. So those that were enrolled 2018 or earlier, nearly 40% or 2 out of 5 said that they were unaware of our student support services. And then 2019 and after, about 12% said that they were unaware. So whatever you're doing at the colleges, people are more aware of student support services. Some additional interesting findings. People, as I mentioned, more folks knew about it in 2019 and later compared to those 2018 and later. The top source for people who learned about student support services was through orientation. So the orientation is where they remembered they learned about student support services. And then recent cohorts were more likely to learn about our student support services from social media and college websites than in 2018 and earlier. All right, so we talked about most used, who used them, and how they learned about the student support services. Let's talk about experiences at our colleges and with the student support services in general. So we asked them, how much do they agree with each of the following statements? And in each of these statements, for those that actually used student support services, this was the percentage of people and how they rated strongly agree or agree to each of these statements. So at the top here, you'll see that 90% of the folks that actually use student support services said that the staff cared about me. Followed by the next statement, of those who use student support services, they said that it helped them achieve their educational goals. That was 86% of people who used it. Similarly, 86% of people who used it said they were satisfied. Almost 80% said that the services helped them achieve their personal goals. And almost 3/4 said that the services helped them achieve their employment goals. So some pretty high numbers or percentages related to satisfaction with student support services overall. Now we ask them, what about their overall education and training? 98% of all respondents, not just those that use student support services, They said that they were satisfied or very satisfied with their education and training at our regional community colleges. And we also asked them about these particular sentiments. The top rated statement was that my time at the community college was a worthwhile investment. 93% out of all the people who answered this question said that it was a worthwhile investment. To me, this is a very important finding because there's been a ton of articles out there that talk about how people are doubting the value of education. The cost is not worth the amount of debt people get into for them to not get a job that pays a living wage or gives them a better quality of life. But this particular survey shows that 93% of the people who at least took a course said it was a worthwhile investment. The second most highly rated or statement that folks strongly agreed to was, I learned practical skills that were useful in the workplace. And then overall, they said the colleges helped them achieve their personal goals, educational goals, and employment goals. And you could see the percentage breakdown of each of these statements over here on the right. All right. What was another important finding related to this top statement here? My time at the community colleges was a worthwhile investment. Well, we found that students who used any type of student support services were more likely to endorse this statement than students that didn't use support services. So what that means is that the more students who use student support services, they were more likely to say than students who didn't that their community college experience was a worthwhile investment. So this is, again, major finding, in my opinion, that student support services really helps with our students' perception on whether or not the community college education is worth it. All right. So last research question. Are employment outcomes associated with student support services use and experience? So we asked people, are you currently employed right now? What is your employment status? For the most part, half of the people who responded to our survey were employed. That's pretty good, I think. And then 7% were retired, 10% reported being self-employed. That's a pretty good number considering that 2018 was the year that, or earlier, was the year that most folks last enrolled in the community college. And then you can see here at the end, some folks were unemployed, not seeking employment, unemployed, seeking employment, or they preferred not to answer. So overall, the numbers don't look too bad. But one of the important findings was that when we asked them whether the community colleges helped them achieve their employment goals, respondents who said they use career services were more likely to strongly agree with the statement, overall, the community colleges helped me achieve my employment goals, than anyone else that did not use career services. So again, if you want to see a relationship between employment outcomes and student support services, we found that it was statistically significant that people who took career services or used career services were more likely to strongly agree that the colleges helped them achieve their employment goals. Another important finding was that a greater proportion of Black, Indigenous, people of color students agreed that these services helped them achieve their employment goals. So again, remember we compared the white population versus the BIPOC population, and it showed that a greater proportion of BIPOC students agreed that they achieved their employment goals, especially if they took student support services. So again, another very large, very important finding in our opinion. We also asked them, how closely related was your job to what you studied at the community colleges? So we asked them, what was your first job? What was your second job or most recent job? And how closely related was it to your field of study? This was another question that we borrowed from the CTE outcome survey, the CTEOS from the Chancellor's Office. And the options they had to choose from were very close. My current job is in the same field. Close, I use what I learned in my coursework and training, even though I'm not working in the same field, and not close at all. And you'll see here that there wasn't really much of a difference for these three categories. So essentially, folks that answered this question, about 46% of them said that their current job or recent job is related to their coursework and training. One thing that is very important for us to note is that those that participated in career services said that they that use career services were more likely that their first job after community college was very close in the field work of training. That was half of the students compared to students that did not use career services overall. So again, for this particular statement, very close. My current job is in the same field of study as my training. If somebody used career services, they were more likely to say that their first job was very close than those that did not use career services. So we asked them, which industry are you in? We try to figure out, is there a specific trend as to where students are ending up, depending on their population status, depending on when they enrolled and so forth. We didn't really find that. It was kind of all over the place. So you'll see here, this is a table of the different types of industries they could report to us as to where they're currently employed. And the percentage distribution is quite varied across the board. The top industry was educational services. So almost a quarter of the people who responded to the survey are in education, followed by healthcare. So that's about 10% or 1 out of 10 respondents. So then we didn't find anything there. It was kind of all over. But we did ask, did they make a living wage? And so for each county, we asked, what is your current wage right now? Are you making below, at, somewhat above, or greatly above the living wage? At the time of when we distributed the survey, the living wage was closer to $19 in San Diego County. It's much higher now, I understand. In Imperial County, it was closer to $16. So we kind of rounded and asked them, are you greatly above, somewhat above, or greatly above, or at the living wage at that $19 an hour or that $16 an hour? And you'll see here that most of our respondents said that they were somewhat or greatly above the living wage. We didn't really find significant findings in there, so I'll just leave it at that. But we did ask them, how quickly did it take them to find a job after they completed their, after they left the community college system? And when you look by year of last enrollment, those that enrolled in 2018 or earlier, they were more likely to find a job by graduation than those enrolled in 2019 or later. So about 4 out of 5 people who graduated or finished a community college or left the community college in 2018 or earlier were more likely to find a job in graduation by graduation. And you can see here for those that enrolled in at least one of our courses in 2019 or later, it was by graduation about almost a third, took about 1 or 3 months, 4 to 6 months, 7, 12 months, and so forth. So not really any differences between the 2 years for these other categories. But when you look at white versus BIPOC populations, we found that a significantly lower proportion of BIPOC students found the job by the time they left the community colleges compared to white students. So basically, upon completion, white students were more likely to find a job than BIPOC students. So 70% versus almost 50%. So those are our major findings. Just to reiterate, here are the research questions. And as you can see, we found quite a few interesting information from the survey, despite the limitations of who responded to it. So as with all of our research, we try to conduct the research, get as many responses from the residents in the region. We examine the survey data and our statistically significant differences, and we hold discussions to solicit feedback, which is what we're doing today. And once we hear from you and what you think about the data, the findings, any questions you might have, we will complete the report with recommendations and reflection questions. I didn't want to share our recommendations because we want to make sure that they reflect some of the discussion that we will have here. So I'm going to stop my share. And again, John Edwards from our team is policing the mute button, but I think now we're going to open it up to discussion. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the information? Any responses? Anything that shocked you, surprised you, didn't surprise you?
This is Oscar from Escondido Law School. I was just wondering, good morning, everybody. I was just wondering, the majority of the students that did respond to any of these questions, were these from non-credit programs, or were these from ESL programs, or just from regular mainstream courses? or were they from CTE pathways within the community college system?
Yeah, we didn't ask to that granularity what types of students because it was just the general population. So if you take a look at this slide that I shared here, let me share my screen again. We were really just trying to see if there was any relationship between student support services in general. So we surveyed the general population. And then if they just said that they took at least one course at any one of our 10 colleges, they were valid responses for the survey. So we didn't ask them, are they non-credit? I mean, you can kind of assume that the 4 people that responded to the survey were from continuing ed, so they're non-credit. But for all of the others, no, we didn't ask if they were specific students from specific programs.
Oh, I see. I
Mhm.
see.
But we did ask them what was their goal in attending community college. I didn't share this, but for the most part, 4 out of 5 said they wanted to earn a degree or certificate. And then the remainder said they were taking classes to update skills or renew a license permit, or they were taking classes for self-enrichment. So even though we didn't have specific programs, this was their distribution of why they took one of our, why they enrolled in one of our colleges.
Right. Thank you.
Let's see. All right, so one of the questions in the chat were, what are the specific services by type, not just the top 3? I'm wondering if general counseling was an option or how it was reflected. Let me try to pull that up. Let's see. Let's see. And Priscilla's on the line with us too. So if you wanted to, I don't think we asked specifically the word general counseling. We put in career counseling in the survey, or academic.
Yes, we didn't ask
Mhm.
that term specifically. We do have a breakdown in the report of what different services fell under each type. But also they had the opportunity to select other for each type of service.
Yeah. So we didn't specifically ask general support services, but each of the ones that we mentioned, let me pull this up here. And this will probably go into the next question. I think somebody has their hand up, so give me 1 minute. So here, it might be a little confusing. I probably should have separated the 2 slides. So of the 292 folks that responded to the survey, 61% of them said they used at least student support services. That's one finding. And then we asked folks, okay, if you used a student support service, which of these did you use? And so you can see this adds up to more than 100% because they were able to select more than one category in terms of what they used at our community college system. So I hope that answers Cole's question that this was the whole population and this was regarding of the people who used student support services. They could select all or select however many categories of these as possible. Yes, that is correct. So for example, here, excuse me, not of the entire population, of the population that use at least one student support service, 38% of them. So let's say that, got it, thank you. And that's a good feedback for the question. So we'll kind of show it a little bit more clearly and separate them. Okay. And I think somebody had their hand raised. Let me take a look here.
Yeah, I had my hand raised. Hi, Travis Sevilla from Miracosta College in North County, Kent. One of the slides you had the hiring rate, like 2018, like people getting jobs, and then 2019, less people getting jobs. Is that adjusted for like availability of jobs, like in the general climate? Like, is there a way, you know what I mean? Like, could that drop off have nothing to do with the college and everything to do with like availability of jobs, basically?
Yeah, that's a good point. We didn't do that to see what the labor market condition was. We just, I believe, let me take a look at. So again, maybe it might not be as significant as we thought, but let's take a
Yeah,
look.
I'm wondering if the drop is less actually, if you account for the like less jobs being around potentially.
we could take a look at each year that they said that they enrolled in the community college system, and then what the labor market condition was. The only one that we can't take a breakdown of was 2018 and earlier.
Yeah,
We-
which is fine.
Yeah, so we were primarily focused on when did you last take a course? 2023 or currently enrolled at the time? 2022, 21, 20, and 19. So that was about 5 years of data we were trying to get. And we were hoping that the 2018 and earlier had a smaller group of people, but it turned out to be the largest group.
Yeah.
But we can look at it, but you can see here that the sample sizes for the dates we really wanted were pretty small.
Yeah.
Yeah, right here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yes, we can take a look, but I think it might be
It
very
might not
breakdown.
affect just because of that sample size, but yeah, be curious to see. I would imagine it has some correlation.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that suggestion. We'll take a look at that. Let's see. And I think I have, oh, Nina had her hand up.
Hello, thanks for the great and interesting topic, Tina and gang. Really nice job. My question is two, actually. One is, do you have sort of super users of services? Because it seems like the more services somebody uses, the higher likelihood they are of success. Like, did you look at that, or is that a possible breakdown that you could find?
This is what we provided. So when you say super users, we try to do them by different population categories.
Right.
For example, females were more likely than males or their other gender counterparts to use academic services. BIPOC versus white, and then 2019 versus 2018, and those that with student special population status. So technically you can consider them the super users, but I don't think we have a direct connection as what you're talking about, such as, well, females, because they took academic services, they were more likely to be employed or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or
Um,
somebody that used multiple things, kind of like to Cole's question about you have more than 100%, you know, somebody that used 2 or 3 different services maybe had a higher likelihood of success. It's kind of what I was wondering.
That's interesting. Okay. Yeah, well, let's look into it to see if the people who selected one or more of these,
Right.
Yes.
if their
So-
outcomes were higher. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes. So we didn't have a sum of across all the services, but when breaking it down by each one, people generally used just one, like one of each type. But we could definitely explore to see if, for example, they used more across all of them to see if there was a difference there.
Yeah. And then the second question is related to the equity gap that you've identified for employment outcomes. I'm wondering if you did anything that looked at that gap for the 2019 and later versus 2018 and earlier. Like, it'd just be interesting to see if that changed between those two timeframes. I don't know if you looked at that cross tabulation.
I don't know, Priscilla, the only one that we had was this one, when they were likely to find a job in terms of
Right.
time period for these two groups. And then the only ones that were statistically significant, I think, were the 2018 versus 2019 grouping, and then the BIPOC versus white, which is this. So upon graduation, BIPOC, there were fewer BIPOC students who said they found a job upon graduation than the white students. Other ones, I don't think any of the other groupings that we looked at had any statistically significant differences. So
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you looked at those two together. The
okay.
timing and the race ethnicity.
Oh, the intersectionality of
Yep,
the,
yep.
okay, gotcha.
Just curious.
Okay, it's the sample size is a little small. We'll take a look and see if there is that.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that was a relatively small sample size, but we could definitely explore.
Well, thank you. Beautiful job.
Yeah, again, I wish we had more people, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, and 23. It was just such a small group of folks that answered it, which is a shame. We'll try again later, but at least for now, you know that across the board, people are really satisfied with their time at the community colleges. Like this was huge for me. The fact that people said this could be great in your marketing. And when I looked at each, well, Priscilla analyzed that, I took a look and peeked at it. I think the lowest score was 96%. of respondents said they were satisfied or very satisfied with one of the colleges, but overall, about 98% said they were very satisfied with their education training in our system. So if you needed a marketing tagline, this is it, right? And that whole worthwhile investment piece of it, it really counters that narrative that people say that college is no longer worthwhile. They're probably thinking about a four-year college or something else, a private sector college, but for the folks that responded to the survey, they thought it was a worthwhile investment.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate that for those who used academic services, career services, health services, and student life services, they were more likely to strongly agree that it was a worthwhile investment. So it really shows just how much of an impact it has on that sentiment.
Yeah. Oh,
Tina, quick question on any of these questions, or towards the end of the survey, was there an opportunity for these respondents to actually type? If, for example, if the question was very similar to what else do you think the college needs in order for you to be successful, or anything like that, like an open-ended question where students can freely add a little blurb saying, well, yes, I actually have an idea, or I actually do need this or needed this, and the college didn't have it.
Yeah, I don't, we didn't have a broad open-ended one. We specifically asked if they didn't have I'm sorry?
Oh, we actually did.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was looking at two. So there was one that asked, if you did not have a positive experience with any of our student support services, let us know why. And then I think the one at the end was, is there anything else you would like to share about your education?
Oh,
and
okay.
career needs?
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let me check. It's hard to, let me unshare my screen so I can take a look. No hands up. There is a question in the chat. Will we be able to rewatch this training? Yes, we have it recorded, so we will send that out when we can. For those that registered for this, we're grateful to you, so we'll send it out to you, the link to the recording. And that way you can take a look at it, and we'll also share the presentation deck. So it's only reserved for those who actually RSVP'd and showed up. So thank you for your time this morning. That's a perk for participating and giving us feedback. All right. Any other questions, comments? I was really excited to see this. I think Priscilla did an amazing job. So if you're ever in search for a researcher, please reach out with Mod Research Consulting. There we go. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, but it'll be awesome if we can do something like this for the adult education portion. Yeah.
Again, it would have been easier if we had folks from each college give us a list of the people that went to their college and then surveyed them. That was pretty hard to find. I'm hoping that the fact that we did this with the general population, it'll encourage the colleges to say, hey, we should really survey our students like this. And then, you know, we'll do that. But maybe adult ed can help us and tell us, hey, here are our students. Let's survey them directly. All right. Any last thoughts before we wrap up? Awesome. All right, great. Well, thank you again, everybody. So after this, I will send you my presentation deck and also the link to the recording in case you want to share it with some folks. And then we'll take your feedback into consideration. We'll take a look and see if there's any other analyses that we need to do. And if not, we'll revise it, the report, and release it hopefully the end of the month. If not, you know, June works well too. All right. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a great, wonderful rest of your day and your weekend.